On this episode with Dan on the Street, Dan meets up with the Gruppuso Foundation's very own Michael Caridi. Next on Dan on the Street.
We're about to meet Dan on the Street, yeah. D-A-N, Dan on the Street, yeah. Talking anything with Dan on the Street, yeah. D-A-N, Dan on the Street, yeah. 10314, just knock on Grace Foundation's door. If you really want to meet Dan on the Street, yeah. Dan on the Street.
And joining us today, Michael Caridi of the Vincent Gruppuso Foundation of Staten Island, and our co-hosts Nick and Natalie from the Dayhab crew. Thank you for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you start out a little bit about telling us about your business upbringing, your background, your family on Staten Island?
Okay, as everybody usually say is that you're not a native Staten Island if you're born here. But I was born in Brooklyn, but I really grew up on Staten Island my whole life. I met my wife in high school on the South Shore, and I started working with her father probably 3 years later. That company was Kozyshack. Kozyshack Foods, which was Kozyshack pudding that people know, the rice pudding, the chocolate pudding and everything. So I grew up in the food business all my life, and then my father-in-law passed away, and around 10 years later we decided that we needed Kozyshack to go to its next plateau, and we sold it, and now we formed the Vincent Gruppuso Foundation, and most of my time is spent on Staten Island in philanthropy and giving back to the community.
Can you tell us who has inspired you? What do you look to advice from?
Who inspired me? A guy was in the food industry. He was the president of Dan & Yogurt. He lived to almost 95 years old. He was a World War II vet, and he taught me a lot as I grew up. And as I went in with him, he nurtured me, he taught me, and then towards the end I was starting to teach him. So I felt good about that. And who do I get advice from? I listen to anybody. I get advice from you. Okay, so one day I'm going to come up to you and I'm going to ask you some questions so you can give me good advice.
Balancing your time professionally and personal family life is important to you. How do you find the right formula and balance?
That's a very tough thing to do. When I first started working, I used to go to work at 4 in the morning. I used to get home probably at 7 at night. I didn't have children until 10 years later. When my children came around, I made it an effort to cut back my work time. I was fortunate enough to do that, so I was able to enjoy my kids growing up. But I always say it's very tough to have two successes at once. I was, again, fortunate because I had people that could run the business, but in the beginning, when you're trying to grow a business and trying to grow a family, it's very hard.
So now, Michael, you talked a lot about your involvement on the island. Can you share a little bit about the different organizations and philanthropies that you work with on Staten Island?
Yeah, most of my philanthropy is around children, the arts, the education, and healthcare. So I am on the chair of Staten Island Hospital. I'm on the Northwell board, which deals in healthcare, and we're building a center for newborn at the Staten Island University Hospital. And then I'm in the arts and education with the St. George Theater. One thing I love is history and building a community cultural centers. So I got involved with Staten Island St. George Theater, and we went for, I've been involved probably there for 15 years. And then the other thing that is close is ICS Charter Schools, working with underprivileged children on the spectrum to help them, adapt to society.
Can you tell us about your passion for the arts and education?
There's a couple things that I love: sports and arts and education, because both of them give you the ability to use your body and experience other activities in life, and outside of just reading and doing other basic things. So I think that it's really important to have the education and arts. I think you could look like a dancer. You look like a dancer. You a dancer?
I'm a singer too.
You're a singer too. You look. I could see it.
I'm a singer too.
You are? What kind of notes you do? You go high note, low note?
High note.
High notes.
So we got the hard questions out of the way. Now, what is your favorite pudding?
My favorite pudding is a mixture of rice pudding and chocolate pudding. Taking a little of rice and put a little chocolate in. Even though we own the company, it took me almost 32 years to get it, having to finally make it. And then I sold it and they canceled the product. So.
That's one of my favorites too. So, well, Nick and Natalie, thank you for being hosts today here on Dan on the Street, and Michael Caridi from the Vincent Gruppuso Foundation of Staten Island. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.